Alexander Bell once said, when one door closes, another one opens. But what if all doors are open at the same time? How do you know which door is the right one? We're going to explore that question today with the Planescape adventure Doors to the Unknown, often considered to be the worst Planescape product published. Hey everybody, my name is Dee and you're watching D&D Ditches, the second-rate channel that covers everything 2nd edition. And today the D stands for Don't Let the Door Hit You on the Way Out, as we show this adventure, The Door. It is difficult to talk about this adventure because I really wanted to give it a chance and not just immediately poo-poo it right out the door. But I've got a lot to say, so hold on for my final thoughts towards the end of the video. Now we're going to flip through this book and take a look at its contents while I summarize and spoil everything. So if you have any desire to ever play through this adventure, you might want to switch off now. But do send this video to your DM. Now let's dive in. Doors to the Unknown was released in 1996 and was written by Bill Slavicsek. Bill started his career with TSR in 1991, and his previous published adventures includes Arcane Shadow for Dark Sun and Night of the Walking Dead for Ravenloft, as well as Day of Spark and Harbinger House for Planescape, which I briefly covered in my Planescape Adventure Showcase video, which I'll link it up here for you. It says on the back this is designed for 4 to 6 players between 2nd and 10th level, as it contains 4 adventures which ties together into a larger narrative. The cover is detachable from the book itself. The book is 64 pages. And the cover turns into a small folder. We also have some additional maps on the inside, which we'll go through in a sec. And we also have some flaps which open up and there are additional information on the inside. Now, I do own a digital copy of this book, and in the digital copy, it's scanned with these flaps facing up. Meaning if you run this adventure from a digital copy, you might actually be missing the additional information that's on the inside of these flaps. So take that into consideration. This adventure starts with 14 pages worth of introduction, which provides an overview, sets up the events prior to the adventure, and introduces some NPCs. And if you're familiar with some of the NPCs in Planescape, this is supposed to be Kylie, although she looks more like Callisto from the X-Men comics. Now, this adventure is not recommended for someone new to this setting, as there's a bit of lore which is considered baseline knowledge for the residents of Sigil, and most of it's got to do with the god Eoska. Now let's talk about Eoska, the former god of portals. Eoska used to be one of the most worshipped powers of the multiverse. He was so influential in Sigil, the city of portals, that he rivaled the Lady of Pain herself. Then came the straw that broke the camel's back. One of the lady's Dabu's servants, named himself Fel, took up the worship of Eoska. The lady was furious. She slew Eoska, banned the worship of Eoska in Sigil, destroyed his temple, and barred all gods and powers from entering Sigil. Eoska's corpse floats lifelessly in the astral plane with other dead gods like Baal, Merkle, and Orcus, and his former place of worship, now called the Shattered Temple, became the faction headquarters of the Aether, who believe that gods are frauds who do not deserve to be worshipped, using the death of Eoska to preach their dogma that even gods can die. The premise of this adventure goes that aeons ago, when Eoska's lifeless corpse was tossed into the astral, 4 portals in Sigil disappeared. But 500 years later, those portals reappeared, albeit for a short time, and would continuously reappear every 500 years. Very few people knew of these portals. Even fewer people knew about the portal keys, and then fewer still ventured into these portals. But only a single person has returned to tell his story. And for his troubles, he was executed. And then another time, someone, or rather something, came out of the 4th door. His name was Lathrez. He was a Mercurial, which is a mysterious new type of creature. He went around the multiverse spreading havoc until 500 years later, where people managed to push him back into one of these portals and trapped him there. As these portals blink in and out of existence every 500 years, people started referring to them as the Blink Portals. The book then goes on to establishing the NPCs who'll be playing a part in this adventure. This fella's name is Estevan. He is an ogre mage, and he was introduced in a supplement called Uncaged Faces of Sigil. There's also Lysandra the Gateseeker and Fel, who also came from that book. And this is Fel. He is a Dabus, which are the servants of the Lady of Pain. Think of them like the public servants of Sigil. They're the ones who maintains buildings and cleans the streets. Now we move on to the prologue. The adventure starts near the Shattered Temple in Sigil's lower ward. A dwarven hobo by the name of Garmundi drew a large crowd by preaching about the return of Eoska, and he proclaims the time of 4 doors is at hand. The players are encouraged to observe and interact with the crowd. Now there are way too many scenes and it goes on for way too long. As you can interact with the crowd, the Aether faction, and then there is a scene with Kylie, there is a scene with Fel, and a bunch of other NPCs, and then at some point the players are handed a calling card or a business card. So the idea is that the players would know that the worship of Eoska is forbidden. Apart from the fact that Garmundi is breaking the law, Eoska is also extremely controversial in Sigil as well, especially since the Shattered Temple is 1, the Aether's headquarters, and 2, a former temple of Eoska. So the Aether are essentially just waiting for the Harmonium, which are the city guards, to turn up to arrest this guy, essentially. So eventually the Harmonium, they show up. They break the crowd and it almost turns into a bit of a riot. As the players may have their hands full dealing with the Harmonium, you'll see that Garmundi, while being chased by the Harmonium, runs towards the Shattered Temple. Now the Shattered Temple is literally destroyed, and there are big cracks and holes in the ground, and Garmundi falls into one of these holes and he disappears. Now my advice is to simplify this scene, as you want the players to move on with the adventure as soon as possible before they get bored. There are way too many scenes in this introduction. If you're not careful, you could actually be spending your entire session just on this intro. And it says at the end of the scene that the Harmonium will arrest the player characters. Now your player characters will not be happy about this, even though nothing happens and they get released overnight, so it just end up being pointless anyway. I would skip this being arrested part because it could lead to your characters doing something even worse, hence incriminating them even further. And you haven't even started the adventure yet. Chapter 1 starts right after that, as assumes that your characters would have spent the night in jail. This adventure is designed for character levels between 2 and 4. Whether your player spent the night in jail or whether this happened immediately after the introduction, your player should have on them a calling card, and it looks something like this. It's from Balthazar Thames and it requests the party's help. It has a gargoyle icon on the card, and he's located on Grey Dragon Lane in the Clerk's Ward. And on the other flap, we have a map of Grey Dragon Lane. Now on the way to Balthazar's office, the party meets Esteban, the Ogre Mage whose artwork that we saw earlier in the book. Now Ogre Mage is also referred to as an Oni in 5th edition, I believe. Esteban is the head of the Planar Trade Consortium, essentially a high-profile merchant lord. Esteban asked the party for help. As you see, one of his ledgers was recently stolen by thugs and he would like it back. Balthazar's office is up the stairs from where you meet Esteban, and he mentions, hey, the door to Balthazar's office kind of seems like it's been opened. So that's the party's prompt to investigate the room, and as the party enters the office, they get swept up by this whirlwind, as the room itself was the blink portal and the gargoyle on the calling card was the key. And the destination of this portal is Thuldanin, the second layer of Acheron. The outer plane of Acheron is located between the lawful neutral Mechanist and the lawful evil Beator. The plane consists of gargantuan metal cubes floating in space, while inhabitants of the plane reside on each surface of the cube, waging eternal battles. But don't stay in one place for too long, as every now and then the cubes collide, pulverizing everything on its surface. On the second layer, Thuldanin, the cubes are hollow. Hey, it's much safer than being smooshed by the cubes, right? Not exactly. You see, this layer slowly turns everything into iron, so don't dilly-dally, which also makes it a great place to dispose of dangerous items. Got an artifact going haywire? Throw it in Thuldanin and let petrification work its magic, which has earned it the title of the scrap heap of the multiverse. But don't set your hopes up too high, as you'll mostly find junk. Now we have a map of Thuldanin on the inside cover. So here you can see is the portal where the party arrives. So upon entering Thuldanin, one of the first things that you see is one of the thugs that stole the ledger, or more accurately, what remains of him. You see, his body has been turned into iron. So I would make the scene a bit more interesting and run it with just his legs being turned into iron. He would still have his arms free as well as a fully functioning head. So this way he can still be interacted with the party in some way. As this is inside one of the cubes of Thuldanin, it's more or less a junkyard. You've got people from all over the multiverse just tossing their junk in this place. So on this map, there are a few locations that can be interacted with. For magical weapons to rust monsters, you've got petrified iron golems, you've got a life bomb, you can see on the map there's some kind of old flying ship that's just dumped in this cube. So that still kind of works, and it's still loaded with live ammunition. So just be aware that the party could be as low as level 2 when they enter into this place. If they do something stupid, well, that's on them. Obviously, at one of these points of interest, the party will find the thugs responsible for stealing the ledger, and it's up to the party how they want to deal with them to get the ledger back. If your party is a curious type, upon retrieving the ledger, they might take a sneaky peek, and they'll find that it is a proper business ledger. But then towards the end of the book, there are actually some notation that's been recorded, and it seems to talk about records of poor portals. Upon returning home, they will give back the ledger to Estevan and receive their reward. Chapter 2 starts 2 weeks after the initial adventure, as at this point the party is expected to be between 4th and 6th level. Now, the last time that we saw Garmundi, the dwarven preacher from the introduction, he fell into a hole at the Shattered Temple and he disappeared. This quest can come from the Aether faction, who wants to apprehend him for his blasphemy about the return of Eoska, or it can come from an NPC representing the Will of One, which is part of the Sign of One faction, as they're trying to resurrect Eoska. Or there's also a third option if the players choose to look for Garmundi due to their own curiosity. So knowing Sigil, it's pretty obvious that when Garmundi fell, he fell into a portal. But the party needs to find out what the portal key is. If they choose to work with the Aether has narrowed the portal key down to one of 3 things, whereas if they work with the Will of One, they know the exact portal key, which is a holy symbol of Eoska. As he was the god of portals, his holy symbol resembles a key, and that is the holy symbol of Eoska. Now, these NPCs will only give you the portal key if you choose to work with them. However, if the players want to do the research themselves, they can seek help with some of the NPCs like Lysandra the Gateseeker or Fel, or they could also look through the Governor's Library for hints. This adventure also introduces an antagonist terrorist organization called the Society of Locked Doors. They want to destroy all the portals in order to segregate Sigil from the other planes. And on the inside flap here is an example of one of their graffiti propaganda about how the cage is infested with the clueless. And if you're not familiar with the planar cant, it means that Sigil has become infested with people from the prime material plane. Now, assuming that you have the portal key, it will activate the second blink portal as you fall through the same hole that Garmundi fell through. And if you don't have the key, well, let's just hope that you do have the key when you fall through, and you'll arrive in Agathion, the 4th layer of Pandemonium. The outer plane of Pandemonium is located between the chaotic neutral limbo and the chaotic evil abyss. The plane is made from solid rock honeycombed with networks of tunnels and caverns. It's dark, it's cold, but the plane's most defining feature is a perpetual howling wind, forever reverberating through the tunnels, more than enough to drive any creature insane. Agathion is the 4th and the deepest layer of Pandemonium. There are no tunnels, just isolated bubbles within dense rock, forming natural prisons for anyone trapped inside. Yet the rock still carries with them the sound of howling winds, proving that there is no escape from the madness of Pandemonium. Now, we also have a map for Agathion, which is this piece is called the Forgotten Vault. Now, because Agathion does not have interconnecting tunnels the way that the rest of Pandemonium does, this is a completely sealed off area. The only way in and out is via the portal. The biggest obstacle that your party will face here in Agathion is actually the winds of Pandemonium. As your party enters certain areas, everyone will need to make a saving throw against paralyzation, and a failure means that the character receives a level of madness. The book will give you some rules and mechanics to use in this section for madness, but this only applies to Pandemonium. It starts with frustration, where the character loses a point of intelligence and wisdom, and then it progresses to despair, where they become berserk in battle, receiving a small hit and damage bonus, but they're automatically surprised on the first round of combat. And then comes hysteria, where they'll run away, refusing to do anything useful. And then finally, resignation, where they'll gain a phobia or a mania of something. But I don't see how resignation is worse than hysteria. Now, the problem here is really easy to get into a death spiral, and having control wrestled away from your players is not great, especially if combat starts breaking out. You can supplement this section with your own creation of the different types of madness. If you also play the Ravenloft setting in 2nd edition, you can also use the madness mechanics from that, as well as some of them like Obsession can work just as well. Now, the shtick with this dungeon is that you will see different visions from different rooms, clearly from someone else's memory. As you explore more of this map, you will eventually find the source of these visions is from a black dragon by the name of Agathon. He suffers from mood swings, but he isn't hostile. He can see the future and say super vague things, but won't say anything specific or useful. You learn that the visions are from his memories, but it ends up being a bit of a pointless encounter. In another room, you'll find a wounded Mercurial called Zarulaz. So Mercurial is a new monster being introduced in this module. Here we have some artwork for it, and the stat blocks on the previous page. Now, they're supposed to be life forms from a higher world called hyperreality, and because of this, they are super powerful and cannot be killed in a conventional manner. As they're from hyperreality, they also refer to our multiverse as the lesser reality. So in their own world, they look more or less like humans. But when they leave hyperreality, what literally happens is that their flesh will jump out of their body, leaving behind the skin and bones, and they just become a body of flesh. When they come to our multiverse, they can take over someone else's body by literally jumping inside of their skin and bones. And during the time while they're inhabiting someone else's body, they will literally burn through it. So they can only inhabit the host body for a limited time before they burn through that, leaving behind a pile of skin and bones, and then they're going to have to go and find another host. So the Mercurial that you find here in Agathion is named Zarulaz, and he is not your enemy. In fact, he is the brother of another Mercurial called Lathuraz, who is the evil Mercurial said to be imprisoned in another one of these doors. And this brother was also the Mercurial that was going around the multiverse spreading evil and chaos that we introduced at the very start of this video. Zarulaz is also going to give you a bit of an info dump at this point. The players can ask him whatever they want, and Zarulaz for the most part will be honest with them. And Zarulaz also tells the party that there are 4 magical items which will aid in the fight against the Mercurial, and tells the party to look for them. The 4 magical items are Rod of Mercury, which allows the user to locate Mercurial located behind the first door, Cloak or Trapping, which allows the user to bind Mercurial located behind the second door, Sword of Lathuraz, which allows the user to damage Mercurial, and Manacles of Lesser Reality, which inhibits Mercurial's power. Both of these items are located behind the third door. Now to carry on with this adventure, eventually the party will find Garmundi. And he can be found in a retriever's nest, and the retriever is the giant spider that you see on screen. And you thought the spiders in Australia were big, at least it's not this. On the completion of this adventure, you can hand Garmundi off to Aether or the Will of One for a reward, or you can tell him he's free to go and do whatever he wants, and that'll be the last time that you see him. Zarulaz, on the other hand, will leave the party, but you will meet him again. And as we move on to chapter 3, this adventure is designed for characters between 5th and 7th level. It takes place during the 4th week of the current Blink cycle, so this would be 2 weeks after the second adventure. This adventure starts with the party getting a visit from Kylie the Tout. Tout is like a guide to the city of Sigil. So she's delivering you a message saying Estevan wants to meet you again and he wants to invite the party for dinner. Essentially, it's an invitation that you cannot refuse. At this point, he says, well, I know you've gone through the first 2 doors. I would like you to investigate and go into the 3rd door. And if you had looked through his ledger previously, you probably know that he has a vested interest in these portals. And he does pay quite well for the jobs. He says, I don't know the key, but just ask around and do your own research. So you've got the same kind of NPCs, Fel, Lysandra, Kylie, that you could consult to try to get some more information on the gate key. Now remember our terrorist organization, the Society of Locked Doors? Well, they're ramping up their terrorist activities. And at this point of the adventure, they've upgraded their threat to assassination. So whichever portal expert that you choose to consult, they will be the target of assassination attempts by this organization. And there will be 3 different attacks that the DM can run at any point. Eventually, the party will find the portal key and the portal location, which is in the market ward. This is also when the party will meet a guy named Caravan. He says he's one of Estevan's agents, and he insists that he goes with the party as per Estevan's instruction, and he's here to help the party with the next door. This door has an unusual portal, so they're introducing another new creature is called a Cortelestial. There is no artwork, but by the description, this is some kind of massive, monstrous being. The size is huge, which is 20 foot long. Because this is some kind of a monstrous being, everybody in Sigil avoids them. But what you're supposed to do is look into his eyes and show no fear. There's a wisdom check involved, and if you pass, that means that you've succeeded the fear check. The Cortelestial will open its mouth, and the mouth itself is the portal. And you're supposed to step into his mouth and you'll arrive in your destination, a prime material world called Logicus. We have a map of Logicus. This world has been created for this module. It's never been seen before or since, and for a very good reason. There was an incident that destroyed this world thousands of years ago, and what remains consists of just a floating island. Magic don't really exist in this world. The only things that function are wizard spells of 1st level and priest spells of 1st and 2nd level. Magic weapons and items also don't function. So there are also people in this world that your party will meet. However, they're also partially made from circuitry and metallic gears. It says here they're an unemotional species who long ago gave up the randomness of passion and free will. They've embraced the programmed awareness of machines. So they're pretty much just robots. There are also other things in this world which simulates a computer. They're units performing calculations, storing data banks and servers. Long ago, a Modron stumbled across this world, and he's decided to stay here and become more or less the ruler of this world. If you haven't figured out by now, this is a science fiction world. So while on this world, there's only a couple of different places to visit. One of the activities that the party can partake in is challenge the Logicus Prime. The Modron who arrived in this world calls himself Logicus Prime. And it's essentially a king of the hill type of challenge. You see this floating island here. Whoever makes it to the summit will be the winner. So you're competing against the Modron. There is a random slard that decides to join the competition as well, plus your playable characters if they wish to partake in this. Now the book says that they have to compete as individuals. I think it's probably more fun if they were to compete as teams or maybe broken up into like duos. So there aren't really any rules in this challenge. So if you decide that you want to sabotage the other team or just beat them in combat, that's totally valid. So if the party wins, they'll receive one of the magic items that Zarulaz asks you to find, but they're also offered the rulership of this world. So if your party member accepts that offer, they will have to retire that character, but they do have the option of declining the rulership. So while you're doing this, Caravan, the guy who tagged along, the one who works for Estevan, sneaks away and frees Latharaz the Mercurial, who was imprisoned in this place. So the floating cube over here is Latharaz's prison. If the party visits this location, they'll be able to see Latharaz being freed. Otherwise, Latharaz will just get freed in the background. And the manacles used to bind him is also one of the 4 magical items that Zarulaz asks you to find. So at this point, you might as well return back to Sigil. Latharaz, the evil Mercurial, was able to get back to Sigil by hitching a ride using Caravan's body. But he leaves Caravan's body once he gets to Sigil, and Caravan actually survives and tells you to go see Estevan. Which takes us to chapter 4, which happens 2 weeks after the previous adventure, and this is designed for heroes between 7th and 10th level. At this point, there's only the 4th and the final door that hasn't been explored yet. Zarulaz is the only one who knows the key to the final door, but he won't tell the party. So what the party's supposed to do is that throughout the first 3 doors, behind each of the doors contain a piece of writing in the Dabu script. And this is what's contained under these flaps. These are the 3 pieces of Dabu script. So the Dabus don't actually speak. Instead, what they do is they project symbols like minor illusion. These are called rebus puzzles. They're kind of like if you think about emojis mixed with additional phonetics. For example, that's address. A plus dress equals address. So these are kind of like puzzles that your players can solve, and all 3 of these together provide you the key for the final door. None of the NPCs in this module were ever specific about looking for these type of clues, so there's a good chance that your party won't find all or any of these. If you found the Rod of Mercury, which is one of the 4 magic items located behind the first door, which lets you locate the Mercurials, you can use it and you can find Zarulaz. And he essentially tells you that Latharaz's goal is to return back to hyper reality, which is located behind the 4th door. And he would like the party to take him with you when he confronts his brother. So it's only at this point that Estevan gives you the background on what Latharaz did previously and why he's bad news and why he needs to be taken care of, essentially. He asked the players to get behind the 4th door and take care of Latharaz. The 4th door is located in an empty tower in the ladies' ward. If the party has obtained all the Dabu script, essentially it translates to a list of gestures that's required to open the portal. However, as Latharaz is also trying to return home, he's taken over the body of the leader of the Society of Locked Doors. If the party goes to the site of the final portal, they'll actually see Latharaz doing the set of gestures which allows him to open the portal. So if the party pays attention, they could just mimic him. Once you're through on the other side of the portal, you arrive in hyper reality, which is called Beldaari, and it's located on Mount Celestia. This is another realm that was created just for this adventure. It was never seen prior to nor since this adventure. So while you're in Beldaari, everything is more intense. The colors are more vivid, the scents are stronger, and everything is doubled while you're in Beldaari. So that means your damage rolls, controls, your spell range, duration, area effect, your movement rates. So Beldaari looks like just a typical forest. You also meet the Mercurials in their native habitat. And their whole thing is that because they exist in this higher reality, that they're more or less unconcerned over the affairs of your party. So pretty much what you do, you're not going to be able to interact with them. The only thing that you're going to get is them going, haha, that's cute kind of thing. So this is the smallest of the 4 worlds. Really the only thing that you can do here is to stop Lathras. He's trying to reach his skin and bones, his original body, and you're trying to prevent him from returning to his body essentially. Hopefully you have been looking for and have found the 4 magical items because they're going to be a big help in taking down Lathras, who is the final boss. So the Mercurial's abilities are kind of completely insane. For example, because they're in higher reality, he's able to get access to all of his powers, which includes Wish. And this is why you should be looking for the magical items. One of them, the Manacle of Lesser Reality, will prevent him from using some of these more dangerous spells like Wish. After taking down Lathras, congratulations, you've saved the world, you've saved the multiverse, but there isn't really anything else apart from that. Like nothing interesting happens after that. And that is the end to the Doors to the Unknown. Now that we've flipped through this book, let's talk about my critiques. I've got 6 of them. Let's start with number 1, breaking established Planescape lore. Bill Slavicsek has written 3 adventures for Planescape: Davis Spark, Harbinger House, and Doors to the Unknown. His adventures have been quite contentious amongst the fandom because there's been one consistent theme: a complete and utter disregard for the lore of the setting. While Davis Spark and Harbinger House turned out to be excellent adventures in spite of the lore inconsistencies, they were minor and can be easily tweaked. Doors, on the other hand, commits more egregious sins which are difficult to overlook. The blink portals defy the law on portals and how bounded space are allowed to work in Sigil, like having an entire room be the portal and just hand wave it by, oh, but these are different, they're blink portals. It's the Planescape version of a wizard did it. Hyper-reality? What the I said a wizard did it. But it just leads to Mount Celestia, and which layer is Beldaari even on anyway? All of them? What kind of bullsh? Are you questioning the wizard? Okay, fine, but here's still something that don't make sense.
On the outer planes, each outer plane represents the purest manifestation of that alignment, hence Mount Celestia represents lawful goodness. If the beliefs, attitude, and alignment of a realm differs from the alignment of the plane, that realm will shift to the plane that closest matches its alignment.
And that's just how the outer planes work. They are the planes of belief.
Beldaari is inhabited by the Mercurials, who are all neutrally aligned. A realm filled with true neutral creatures that aims to preserve neutrality would eventually slip from Mount Celestia into the Outlands, which is the true neutral outer plane.
So how it's written would never work on the planes. Do you take me for a dumbass? Yes, I get it. A wizard did it. And don't even get me started on Logicus, which brings me to critique number 2. Unplanescape tones and themes.
Technically, Planescape encompasses every plane and everything, hence everything is Planescape. Forgotten Realms is located on the Prime Material plane, technically it's Planescape. Spelljammer is located between the Crystal Spheres on the Prime Material plane, technically it's Planescape. Ravenloft is located in the Demiplane of Dread in the Ethereal plane, technically it's Planescape.
Planescape merely allows you the means to travel between these worlds, but each of these settings have distinct tone and themes. Planescape is such an open-ended setting, you're literally working with infinite possibilities, but it's really important to set boundaries and limit what you allow in the game. Take it from me, when you run an anything goes game, you'll see how quickly the game becomes unplanescape.
Logicus is a Prime Material world, which isn't a crime, but Logicus is a thinly disguised science fiction world. You have robots, computer servers, and look at this map, that's a circuit board. The base Planescape campaign setting box set has warned of this.
In my opinion, preserving the tone of Planescape is how you get your players coming back for more. Logicus is a slippery slope. The impact of this is not going to be immediately apparent.
But after a while, your players will think, hey, if robots exist, can we have guns? They will then try to find the world where guns exist. Then comes phones, internet, Wikipedia.
Planescape is not built to accommodate these. Dungeons & Dragons is not built to accommodate these. If you want to play a sci-fi game, play a sci-fi game. Planescape and D&D is not that. Critique number 3, this entire adventure is designed around an unworkable time limit. As it's written, the blink portals stay open for 2 months, let's say 60 days. During this time, your party needs to complete the objectives in all 4 doors, and let's not forget that these adventures are not designed to be played consecutively, meaning you're going to have to insert additional adventures in between these doors in order for your party to be strong enough for the next door. And let's not forget that this is written for 2nd edition where leveling is much slower. Plus, if you're using the optional training level up rules, there are additional gold and time requirement.
Let's look at the adventure level requirements. First door is between level 2 and 4, second door is between level 4 and 6, third door is between level 5 and 7, and fourth door is between level 7 and 10. That's on average 2 level ups between each door. And since each adventure won't give you enough XP for a level up, you're looking at least another 2 adventures in between each door, and that's being generous. And on top of that, this being 2nd edition, natural healing is 1 hit point per day. If you need to heal 30 hit points, that's a whole month of downtime. Though this can be improved by having a priest in the party, but this is still far slower than 5th edition.
If we go by the book, I dare say no party is going to accomplish all of that within 2 months, which baffles me on why would you even write that if your rules don't even support it. Critique 4, the NPCs are boring. A bland adventure can be salvaged by interesting NPCs, but in this book, they're blander than oatmeal. Take the villain's motivation, for example, as is written in the book. And I quote, "He wants to travel the multiverse, gaining power and spreading terror wherever he goes." And here's the thing, Planescape wants you to play with philosophy. Each outer plane has its own morals and ethics, and they all see the multiverse differently. And all of them are right. They wouldn't exist if they weren't right. The outer planes are made from belief. Instead, we got a cartoon cardboard cutout. This adventure also borrows several NPCs from this book, Uncaged, Faces of Sigil, and does absolutely nothing interesting with them.
Kylie is turned into a messenger chick who says things like, "You better hurry, I know I would." Estevan turned into the moral compass that tasks you with a mission to destroy the villain. Estevan is lawful evil. He's the head of the Planar Trade Consortium, essentially a monopoly mercantile network.
And if the party loses the final battle, the epilogue goes, Estevan will eventually gather another group of heroes and send them to battle Mercurial.
I get that he would have an interest in preserving the multiverse so he can conquer it, but if the threat was so serious, he would escalate the matter to the Factals. His specialty is commerce, not warfare. He's going after the economic victory on civilization, not trying to be Professor Xavier. And then we have the Will of One and Fel, some of the more interesting NPCs from Faces of Sigil. Will of One is a splinter of the Sign of One faction. They're entirely devoted to resurrecting Aeolska, but in this adventure they're relegated to quest givers.
This adventure starts with the proclamation of Aeolska's return. You have the Will of One and Fel being featured in this adventure. It's almost like it's teasing something. Which brings us to critique number 5, unfulfilled propositions. The danger of using a grandiose setup is you better deliver on your promise. The bigger the setup, the bigger the payoff needs to be. These doors only open every 500 years under very specific circumstances for a very short time. You are building up the player's expectations. Aeolska is prominently featured at the start of this adventure. Your players are putting 2 and 2 together and they're already imagining in their mind how epic the story is going to be. But then at the end of this adventure, you're given a, "Y'all can go home now."
What, that's it? The final door didn't even lead to anywhere interesting, it was just a forest. And unfortunately, this started the trend of ambitious setups with disappointing payoffs, which marred all of the late era Planescape adventures. They promise so much but end on a whimper. And yet the earlier modules, including Bill's own Davis Spark in Harbinger House, had modest starts and builds to a photo finish. Sometimes less is more.
We're on the home stretch now. Critique number 6, clumsy railroad. I'm gonna say something controversial here. I don't mind a railroad. Many of my players don't mind a railroad. In fact, many players prefer a heavily structured game because it makes them feel like they're on the right track. It should come as no surprise that Doors to the Unknown is a railroad. Doors 1 and 2 can technically be done out of order, but the flow of events naturally progresses in a 1, 2, 3, and 4 manner. But my philosophy is, if you're going to run a railroad, don't make the players backtrack. The choo-choo should only go one way. The railroad structure trains the players to always be moving forward, except there are actually multiple objectives for the first 3 doors.
For example, Door 1 Thuldanin has 3 objectives. 1. Retrieve the ledger, which was the initial objective. 2. The Darbu's message, which is part of the gate key required for door number 4. 3. Locate the Rod of Mercury, which assists with the final encounter with the villain. Except at this point, the players are not aware of objectives 2 and 3, likely they will leave after completing first objective.
In door number 2, the players meet Zarulaz, who informs them that there are 4 magical items which can assist them with their battle against the Mercurial. He won't provide any hints on where to look, of course, but we know they're all behind the doors. But the party doesn't necessarily know that, especially if you as the DM have inserted additional adventures between the doors. The players might not think to check behind door number 1 because the adventures just train them to keep moving forward, but if they do, it requires backtracking.
And then after completing door number 3, the game essentially goes on pause as your players will need to figure out the key to door number 4, except none of the NPCs are helpful.
And now you decide you want to be a sandbox?
And if they decide to search through the first 3 doors again, that's more backtracking, and at this point the adventure resembles a 90s point-and-click adventure game as your players are trying to click on random things on the map trying to figure out a magical combination of prompts to progress the game. You want to do the goat bit again?
And it's likely that your players will arrive at door number 4 without the gate key and maybe some of the magic items, and the module pretty much foresaw this by essentially saying, well, if you don't have the key, just watch the villain open the door and copy him, or just rush in after him. Had the adventure been more upfront about telling the players that they need to be looking for these clues much earlier in the adventure, there's a much higher chance that the players are going to be able to solve this for themselves, feel really accomplished they solved the quest, and not having to rely on a failsafe. So, any pros at all? I think there are some fun ideas in here, and despite hating the premise of Logicus, that's actually the chapter that I enjoy the most. It starts with the escort mission and the assassination attempt by the antagonist, and I always love it when the opponent's target is not the party. It always takes them by surprise, at least for the first round of combat, as they enthusiastically go after the opponent while leaving their primary target defenseless. It's a great way to teach them, out here on the plains, you're not that important. I would even expand on these assassination attempts, maybe poison food or drink, or a fear spell that's been cast on the NPC, making him run away from the party. Now the party's gonna have to try and chase them down and protect them. Let's make these escort quests interesting, shall we? Yes, I am an evil DM. I also love the King of the Hill game where you race to the top of this hill against NPC competitors. Do you use might, speed, or wit? Put in obstacles, traps, treasure, maybe throw in a little bit of intrigue, and that could be a session on its own. But there's more in this adventure that I would take out than keep. Let's say I only like the steering wheel and the radio of the car. It's easier at this point to take them out and install them in another car than to replace everything around it. So how would I run this adventure? I wouldn't, as the story doesn't actually go anywhere, so that needs to be fixed first. Something needs to happen at the end of the 4th door, so figuring that out will be the first step. Maybe this could be an entryway towards a Resurrection of Eoska campaign. I drop the 2-month time limit and say that the portals have an undetermined amount of time where it remains open, so it still maintains some sense of urgency. I will move Zarulaz to be behind the 1st door and Thuldanin. Say that his mercurial physiology prevents him from the petrification effect. So the party would know about the magic items and start searching for them right away, and also tell them that the key to the final door was known by the Darbus from like hundreds of years ago, so the party would also be on the lookout for Darbu's script. I will place Zarulaz in the spot where you find the mysterious staff and take the staff out because it doesn't serve any purpose in this adventure. Door 2, Agathion's main problem lies with how the plane of Pandemonium handles light, as it's prohibitively difficult to find a light source. The winds of Pandemonium snuffed out all flames. I think it's a little irresponsible for the DM to drop your players in Pandemonium without giving them some kind of light source, so I would give them like a light wand or something that they would have found prior to the adventure. Infravision and dark vision don't work in Pandemonium, so it's not going to be fun for the players if they can't see anything. Leaving door 3 Logicus in the prime material plane is fine, but I would remove everything that is sci-fi-esque. The inhabitants are programmed illusions of the real people that perished from this place aeons ago, and they can only repeat certain phrases. I would also get rid of the circuit board, just replace it with something more fantasy. This way you can still run more or less the same events, but it just feels more fantasy and tone appropriate. As for Beldaari, I would place it in Cronius, the 7th layer of Mount Celestia, since very little is known about it anyway. Make the Mercurials lawful good and unconcerned over the affairs of lesser beings, since this is similar to how patron
patronizing the high-tier Archons treat lesser beings anyway. This will make Lazarus being evil a significant departure from the norm, and will also make sense why he wants to travel and explore the rest of the multiverse. And that brings us to the end of this video. Let me know your thoughts about this adventure, and remember to like and subscribe for more 2nd edition content, and if you have any suggestions what you want me to cover, let me know. Until next time, hope we get to hang out again in my next video.